Let me welcome everybody. Thank you for coming this evening to participate in this Zoom meeting with alumni. I know I've enjoyed the various Zooms I've been on with alums the last year or so, and especially now celebrating our bicentennial. I'm joined tonight by three of my esteemed colleagues, now retired. Lesley Farlow is retired from the music and dance department, Michael Lestz from the history department, and Maurice Wade from philosophy. And we're going to begin, each of us, telling you a little bit about what retired faculty do, how we spend our time, and then we'll try to address a few questions about the college and its future. And we have about an hour to do so. And again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to start out with a few recollections. I find it hard to believe that I retired almost 20 years ago in 2004. And one of the things that I particularly enjoyed when my late wife and I did a lot of traveling. We had spent a lot of time in Italy because I was very involved with the Rome program and the Elder Hostel, now Rhodes Scholar programs at Trinity, still runs in Italy. But after retirement, we could branch out more. We had trips to Egypt, Costa Rica, Prague and Budapest, Normandy, and various other places. And those travels were great fun. A lot of them were Elder Hostel, now Rhodes Scholar programs, which are very well run, and you meet a lot of interesting people. And I would recommend to some of you alums out there, if you don't know about the programs, Rhodes Scholar programs that the college runs in Italy, Google Rhodes Scholar and get some information. It's been a very important part of Trinity's activities. I also had some time to do some writing. I finished writing a couple of books and a few other articles, and that was a lot of fun. I have to confess that I like getting the emails from the college, so I know what's going on. But I also take a certain delight when I get an email that says, "Get your grades in on time." I simply delete it and go on. So it's nice to keep in touch, but then to realize we don't have all these obligations that we used to have. So that's been fun. One of the activities I particularly enjoyed is we began 7, 8 years ago a group of retired staff and faculty, and I'm the chief convener, and we usually we get together maybe 3 times a year for lunch. It's mostly just social, but sometimes one of our fellow retirees will have something interesting to tell us about, or we might have a new member of the administration come and talk to us. But those have been very, very meaningful get-togethers, usually 25 or 30 people at each one. And it's really a nice way to sort of to keep in touch. We were thinking about, I have so many memories of my 40 years. I mean, I graduated in 58 and I liked it so much, I came back and got a job. And 40 years on the faculty and lots of good memories. But I'll tell you, the memory that's the most fun is that when we graduated in 58, there was about 10 days between the last exams and graduation, and most people went home. But I and 5 or 6 of my buddies stayed around. We took out to dinner some of our faculty friends, and we topped off the weekend by having a cocktail party underneath the bishop for about half a dozen of our faculty friends: Bob Stewart, George Cooper, George Nichols, John Dando. And we also invited the president. And we didn't say who they came, but one of Ralph Lawson, who was a one of our classmates in on this, was beautiful calligraphy, so the beautiful invitation to President Jacobs. And as we were having our drinks under the bishop, the dean of the faculty, Arthur Hughes, came strolling by the chapel with his son. I think he was sent out by President Jacobs to scout out what was going on. And lo and behold, a few minutes later, the president came striding across the quad and joined us for drinks. And boy, did we think we had just pulled off the greatest coup ever. I have lots of memories, but that one really, I must say, sticks out. It was great fun. But that's enough for me. I'm going to turn it over to Lesley and ask her to reflect on what she's been up to since retirement. Lesley?
Hi, everybody. I wish I could see all your faces. What have I been? So I retired in the spring of 2020, and I was supposed to retire in May, but I thought I'll take my last semester as a sabbatical, which was prescient. I completely dodged COVID in the college. So I did my last performance in New York in 2019. I did my last performance in New England on March 8th in 2020 in New London. And 5 days later, we went into lockdown. So things, of course, were different for people who are performers. But I was also working with a friend who was a co-founder of a dance magazine called Contact Quarterly, which has been in existence since the 1970s, I think. And they were making the transition from a print publication to an online publication. So I had this job right away doing that. So I spent a lot of time doing that and closing up the office. I taught some guest classes for Trinity on Zoom. So I wasn't totally detached. I still was connected because I really did miss teaching and miss all the students and faculty. But since then, I've done some other kinds of teaching. During COVID, I did a lot of teaching on Zoom. I did something called Moving Stories with Judy Doran's company. We taught a class for people who were struggling with mental health issues. And it was a movement, oh, there's my hands. It was a movement and writing class that we did online, which was really interesting. And I'm still doing the choreography that I've done for many years with a company called the First Generation Project. It's they're kids that are a youth physical theater company based in Springfield, Massachusetts. And they're all, almost all of them are first generation to live in the U.S. So we usually have high school or kids who then go to college, many of whom might not otherwise have gone. And we do evening length works that are based on their stories. And we usually do them in all languages. So the current piece we have is called Mother Tongue. It's in Nepalese and English and Swahili and Spanish and Arabic. So it's a really interesting combination of things with movement as well. So I'm still doing that. And I'm writing a book. It's a book I've wanted to write for a really long time, and I'm finally writing it. It's about how AIDS affected the dance community in New York City, because that was my life as a young dancer. And I did some interviews at the Oral History. I ran the Oral History Project at the Library for Performing Arts at Lincoln Center while I was dancing and choreographing, and I started the AIDS Oral History Project. So I'm using those interviews as kind of the anchor for the book. So I'm working on the book proposal right now, so it's still in its early stages, but I'm really excited about it and sort of reconnecting with people in that way. And two other things, and then I will finally stop. I'm birding. Yep. I watch birds. I follow them around. I know how to ID birds. I can ear bird. I can tell you when I hear a song what bird it is. And I can tell you from its behavior, having looked at so many years of dance, what kind of bird it is. And I'm also starting, we were talking about singing earlier, I'm starting to do some sacred harp singing, which I've always loved. Some people call it death metal folk. It's really kind of intense, but so I'm starting to do that too. Favorite memories, I don't have a single favorite memory. I have so many. The student dance concerts, my students, the people coming into my office and plopping down on the couch and telling me stuff. Finding out that engineering student was actually a hugely gifted choreographer, all kinds of wonderful things. I loved my posse. I was a posse mentor. There are many courses that I loved teaching as well, especially some of the beginning classes, like the class called Why Do We Dance, which was about ritual origins of dance, turned out to be Dance as Resistance. And that was a fabulous course because it developed with the students as we were doing research and discovering things. We realized how dance can serve as a form of resistance. So that was a fun memory. I think it's time for me to stop.
Not if you don't want to say more.
I think I'm just trying to, I haven't picked out a single, I mean, I remember a student dance concert. I love the name of it. Students came up with the name Dancing Down the Bones, which I loved. We had been working with Natalie Goldberg's Writing Down the Bones, which is based on meditation and writing. And so we use those structures for the dances. Yeah, I was talking to two new faculty members yesterday. I came down to Trinity and I said, I loved teaching at Trinity, and I'm so excited for the two of you to have this incredible set of colleagues and these wonderful students that you can really work with. And it's not easy. And there's a lot of what I would call academic mishigas, but that's true anywhere. And I really loved working at Trinity.
Thank you, Lesley. Speaking of dance, I'm in a retirement community now, Seabury Retirement Community in Bloomfield. And as one of the alums I think attending tonight said, I started in Seabury on the Long Walk and I ended up at Seabury in Bloomfield. But we have movies every Wednesday night. And last night, I've seen it before, was Billy Elliot, that wonderful movie about the coal miners in Northern England, and Billy is a dancer. Beautiful, beautiful movie. So we'll put that on the recommended movie list if you haven't seen it. Billy Elliot, a 2000 movie. Okay, thank you, Lesley. Okay, Michael, you're on.
Well, I, like Lesley, retired in 2020. I was on a phased retirement plan, so I didn't teach in the spring term. And that was great because during the spring term of 2020, Trinity went into lockdown and distance learning. So I didn't have to cope with distance learning. I don't think I would have been particularly good at distance learning. And most of my colleagues who were obliged to do that didn't find it a fun experience, with some exceptions. There were some I think who adapted very well, but I always enjoyed the fun of being in a classroom and seeing people's faces, and there's always a kind of performative part to teaching, and you miss that if you're Zooming. So for those 2 years, the 2 years of the lockdown, my first 2 years of my retirement, I had a very ambitious travel schedule to Asia, and I was forced to put all of that on hold. And so I continued to work on a book that I've been toiling away on for a while, that deals with a Chinese traveler who visited Cambodia in the 13th century, at the end of the 13th century in the 1290s. And I'm making progress on that. And I also decided, and this is tied to my ancient days at Trinity as a Trinity student, I decided, Chinese and other Asian languages throughout my working career at Trinity and teaching career had been my focus. But as an undergraduate, I was deeply interested in Russia, and I started Russian at Trinity with a professor named Walter Levitt, who was a terrific guy, and his real language was French, but he spoke a number of languages, and he spoke all of them with an absolutely impeccable accent, a remarkable memory. And what made studying Russian with him fun was that he would take a group of us Russian learners. He had a house on, not a house, but an apartment on Broad Street, and he would invite us over for Russian Scrabble. And he would serve vodka and Zakuski and Max Bartko and Norman Markovsky and others. Also Karl Hansen, the German professor, was taking Russian then. And we just had a marvelous time speaking Russian and trying to win in Scrabble. But one problem with bringing back my Russian was that I really didn't have anyone to talk to, and the first opportunity that when I finally got back to traveling, I did get back to traveling last November. I went to Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam, and while I was in Laos, in Vientiane, the capital of Laos, I was visiting a weaving gallery, and a group of Poles about my age arrived. And knowing that all Poles of that age learned Russian, and since I don't speak Polish, I said, "Здравствуйте, как идет? Hello, how are you? Привет, welcome." And one of the Poles turned bright red and came over to me and said, "Я никогда хочу слышать этот unprintable язык. I never want to hear that X language again." And he said, then he went on to say, "I've had enough of you Russians." And I said, "Я не русский. I'm not Russian. I'm an American." And then his attitude changed. But I said, I only spoke to you in Russian because I thought that would be a common language. But that tells you something about the world that we're living in today, tensions between peoples. This was post Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine. Let's see what else. I'll close on this. A favorite Trinity memory. One of my favorite memories, actually, it's a set of memories. I remember I led, I think, 17 or 18 treks in Nepal with Trinity students. They were all credit-bearing courses. I led a semester-long course there in 2001, and I led many treks to various parts of Nepal. And a favorite memory is, and this happened twice actually, hiking to the Annapurna Base Camp, which is at about 17,000 feet, in a snowstorm with 16 Trinity students. And we got there, and the snow was already up to our knees. And unfortunately, the hut was very warm and well heated, and we had a nice soup and a meal. And the next morning, the weather was absolutely beautiful, and we were able to go out and look at the Annapurna Glacier from where we were. And to me, that epitomized what a Trinity education could be about. I mean, they're was something really wonderful about being able to take students who had never been to Asia, to this distant part of Asia, and to enjoy this remarkable experience with them. So,
Very good. Thank you, Michael. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Maurice, it's your turn, please.
All right, I assume everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Well, I retired in 2021. My last semester of teaching actually was when COVID hit. So right in the middle of my last semester, we were told to go home for what we thought would be 2 weeks. So so my last semester of teaching was not quite what I had hoped it would be. Well, what have I been doing in retirement? Well, for a couple of years now, I've been running a James Baldwin reading group with some Trinity faculty, some retired faculty and their spouses. And that's been a wonderful thing. We've read almost everything that Baldwin has written. We've read every biography of Baldwin we could find. We've been watching videos. We just finished reading Baldwin's screenplay for a movie on the life of Malcolm X, which to some extent Spike Lee's version was based upon. And in my first year of retirement, the college had a year-long workshop on digital humanities and pedagogy and scholarship in the digital humanities, and they allowed me to participate. And each of us needed to have a project. And my project became working with a story mapping platform focusing on telling the story of colonialism in the Caribbean. And a story mapping platform lets you integrate text and video and pictures and charts and graphs in order to tell a story. So I developed these 4 story maps about colonialism in Haiti. That project involved a couple of people in the library who were IT specialists, and a young faculty member from anthropology, Amanda Guzman, joined us. And so now that small story mapping project of mine has become part of a larger project to develop some digital resources for Trinity's Center for Caribbean Studies. And we're working this year with a couple of student researchers on that project. Otherwise, for the first time in my life, I'm actually getting regular exercise. And it's a wonderful thing, right?
amazing.
I'm down from 225 to 197. So there we go. And my wife, who retired just this July, was also a Trinity faculty member and an anthropologist, has been trying to get me to travel some. I'm not much of a traveler. I'm a stay-at-home kind of guy. But in September, for our 40th anniversary, we did a river cruise in Provence. And that was astounding. It was absolutely wonderful. Indeed, it felt kind of decadent. We were taken care of so very well. And I'm not eating that much, that well, and I didn't have to cook any of it. All I had to do was sit down and be served. And the tours were just wonderful. I learned a great deal. When it comes to memories, well, a couple of things. First, let me start by saying what I most miss in retirement. I most miss those 4 walls of the classroom, I must say. Insofar as I have a best self, I kind of felt like that best self came out in the classroom. I don't miss the grading, I'll be honest about that. I don't miss some of the difficult conversations one had to have around such matters, but I do miss being in the classroom, talking about Socrates or something like that with a group of students, and at the end of the class, saying to myself, who knew we could talk about that in that way? So I very much miss that, and maybe I'll be able at some point to teach a bit again. As for favorite memory, I have many, but one has to do with colleagues. philosophy began, at least for me, in 70 Vernon Street, but we eventually moved to the McCook Academic Building. And Richard Lee, Miller Brown, Drew Holland, and I, back in those days, were Scotch drinkers. So each of us had a bottle of nice Scotch in our office. And at the end of the day, when pretty much everyone was gone and before we went home, it would be someone's turn to pull out their bottle of Scotch, pour everybody a small drink, just a small drink, and argue about philosophy. And I really enjoyed those arguments with those guys. I mean, and feeling like every now and then I could hold my own with them. Only every now and then. I mean, most of you know those guys and how smart they were. But so far, for me, retirement is a work in progress. I'm not quite sure what I'll be doing next year and the year after. The Baldwin Reading Group, I think, is running its course. We've run out of stuff, or we're close to running out of stuff. But maybe we'll move on to another author, because the group itself has just been a wonderful thing to participate in. It's kind of reminded me of my best times as a graduate student many decades ago. As I used to say to my students, I'm a professional talker. So I'm no longer professional, but I'm still a talker. So I'll stop now.
Thank you, Maurice. And you know, it's all right at our age to go on a riverboat in Provence and be decadent. You know, why not? Why not? Thank you all. I realize I've been retired almost 20 years. Good grief, that's hard to believe. But anyway, we won't dwell on that in my old age. We have a couple questions we thought we would try to get to tonight. And I'm going to read you the first one. And I'm going to ask Lesley then to start off with some reflections on that question. And the question is, do you have any thoughts on how the college can remain relevant and competitive in a changing world? Big question. Lesley?
Well, it is a big question. My first thoughts on that are going to sound kind of old-fashioned, but I'm going to say them anyway. I think the college and the education offered in a liberal arts institution stays relevant when it focuses on the skills, the really basic skills that people need in all disciplines. Learn to write, learn to communicate verbally, clearly, and effectively, learn to listen and listen responsively, learn to do research, ask questions, be curious, become adept at the technology that you need in order to do what it is that you need to do. Those kinds of things that the college fosters, that it allows for the shifts and changes maybe in specific content or whatever that will be required as things around the world change. I also had another thought, and maybe this is useful or not. And it's a thought about the nature of success, how we define success for our students, for ourselves, how we have a conversation about that. What is successful? And I think about in that conversation, the opportunity to embrace the experience of failure. And that, certainly comes to the fore in grading or in students receiving grades, but just the notion in general of how you engage in the world, that it's always an improvisation. That comes from certainly my dance and theater background, but I think that that's not a wild guess at how we do engage with the world. So I guess, I think if the college focuses on those skills through the lens of whatever discipline interests the student. I mean, you learn all those skills in philosophy, you learn all those skills in history and in engineering, and there may be other specifics, but really grounding it in the deep inside way that we engage with the world. I think those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Michael?
Well, I thought a bit about this question, which I think we were supposed to do. And I think that a Trinity education is still both relevant and competitive. I think there are no problems in either regard. I often, during the time I was teaching, people would come to me and say, well, what's the difference between Wesleyan, Amherst, Williams, Wheaton, et cetera, all these small liberal arts colleges? And my reaction was always to say, well, really, they all have their own style. The campuses are different. Their funding, their endowments are larger or smaller, but they all have excellent faculties, and any one of them will be fine for your son or daughter. Of course, I'm partial to Trinity, but my daughters went to Trinity. I think that Trinity, I look at Trinity over the years that I've known the college, and I think that we, and this has really been something powered by the faculty, have constantly been changing. When I first started at Trinity, actually before I got to Trinity as a teacher, when I was a student, college was talking about starting a sociology program, and ultimately we did found a sociology program. The college, Maurice and I, when we were young teachers, we worked on making the curriculum more expansive when it came to global issues, African American studies, and gradually that took shape, I think, in a very interesting way that made us both more relevant and more competitive. I mean, and we were thinking of that because we a lot of us young people had come from good graduate schools, and we looked at Trinity and we said to ourselves, well, how can we make things more interesting and better here? What's lacking? What's missing? And at that stage in Trinity's history, back in the 70s and on into the 80s, the curriculum was still in certain ways very limited and parochial, and it continued to change and to grow, and it grew for all sorts of reasons. I mean, suddenly it was thought that we needed, for obvious reasons, a computer science major, and we founded one, and today it's flourishing. Environmental studies, urban studies was added. Centers were added. So I think the college has been struggling, again, powered mostly by the faculty to be a state-of-the-art institution. I think one thing that is working today against liberal arts colleges and indeed all the big, or the powerful small private colleges is the size of our fee. When you've got a comprehensive fee that's topping $70K, that's a heavy lift for a lot of parents. And one of the things that Trinity desperately needs, and I've been working on this project with my class, is creating more scholarships. Our class has created a scholarship which we introduced at our 50th reunion. And I'm happy to say that now we have one student in each of Trinity's classes, two who have graduated. But that's of vital importance to the college, and schools like Williams and Wesleyan, Amherst. I think principally of Williams and Amherst because they're so heavily endowed. They have a lot more money when it comes to financial aid, and that's a vital component to being competitive in this day and age. And it's a project that I think that we in all of the college's constituencies, parents, graduates, ex-teachers, should be working on, because it's going to be important to our future. The last thing that I'll say is I think that a very important thing that has been added to Trinity, and I alluded to it, is that we have a much more interesting relationship with Hartford than we used to. When I was an undergraduate, I mean, I was from Pennsylvania and came here, and frankly, in the course of the years that I spent here, I really didn't get to know the city very well. And the college has really worked hard for a long period of time trying to create, a more fascinating interface between the college and the city, and that continues today. The Caribbean Studies program that Maurice referred to has built a link between us and the sizable Caribbean community in the greater Hartford area. And that's a new and useful and stimulating thing. It's very good for the students. But the note that I would end on, and I think something that I felt very strongly, is that the college, this little college, any college, needs to know that it's in competition with all of the other schools in its league. Some of I was a runner, and in a race you can't stop running. You don't want to DNF. You don't want to have a do not finish. You want to keep running and do absolutely as well as you can. And if the college begins thinking of itself only in a self-referential way, I really think that we do ourselves damage. So I think that we should look at all the indices of success that we think are important, and know as a community what they are, and then try to run to achieve them.
Thank you, Michael. Said like a true runner that you are. Maurice, some reflections?
Yes, I'll piggyback on Michael's comments about the city. I mean, after all, one of the things that makes Trinity distinctive is we're a small liberal arts college in a city. And I think over the last several years especially, the college has done a great deal to engage the city in ways that are good for the students, and in ways that are good and the faculty and the institution, and in ways that are good for the city. I think that needs to continue. And the college, frankly, has a student body and a faculty that's more engaged with the city in the past, both personally and professionally when it comes to the faculty. So that distinctive characteristic of being a small liberal arts college in a city, I think, is something we have to continue to build on and forefront and market. When it comes to the relevance of liberal arts, it seems to me the liberal arts are always relevant. The problem is communicating that, getting that across. And I think that's especially pertinent today, because the world has always been complicated. It seems even more complicated now than ever before. And we live in a time when we're bombarded with information and images and opinions and analyses of that world. And, to use a technical term, a lot of it is, excuse my vulgarity, crap. And it seems to me one of the things that a liberal arts education can do for us, not only when we're students, but as lifelong learners, is help us to critically assess and evaluate all that stuff that's coming at us continuously. I mean, I think one of the problems we face in this society is folks who've accepted narratives of one kind or another that are just loony, and that pit us against each other in very, very destructive and I think potentially even catastrophic ways. And I think one of the things a liberal arts education can do for us, again, as lifelong learners especially, is equip us to think critically about all of that stuff, and also help us to talk to each other, even in our differences, our sharp differences, in ways that are community building rather than community destroying. And again, as I say, I'm a former professional talker, so I'll stop talking.
Thank you very much. I'll offer a few reflections by way of several anecdotes, but it has to do with the relevance of the liberal arts and science education. I filled in as dean of the faculty from 1984 to 87. And I remember going on a trip to Baltimore to talk to alums. And I was talking with a former advisee of mine, history major, who now worked for a bank. And he did a lot of interviewing when they were hiring. The bank had just changed its policy in hiring to favor liberal arts graduates over business graduates. Why? Because after a few years, it was the liberal arts people who could move on, who had the adaptability to move on to other positions and to learn new things and so on. All the cliches about learning turn out to be true, and that always stuck in my mind. And I've heard that kind of story ever since. Secondly, I got to know, when I was interim president a couple of times, I got to know Walt Harrison. Walt is class of '68. He's on the board now, and he's retired as the president of the University of Hartford. And he did a piece recently called "The Only Constant is Change." But I want to quote one short paragraph, and this has to do with what I think has always been one of the great strengths of Trinity, and indeed I would say in the competition in NESCAC, we would stack up very well, and that is the good working relationship of faculty and students. And this is what Walt wrote. He said, "What I hope will never change is the close connection Trinity students have with the faculty. My relationships with professors," and he mentions Paul Smith, Robert Folk, George Cooper, John Dando especially, "helped to define a liberal arts education for me, and far above and beyond that, helped to shape me intellectually and personally, and they remain an important part of how I define myself." And I think that's very important. The third one I remember is my late colleague, Ted Sloan. Several of his stepdaughters went to Trinity. And I remember one of them majored in theater. And her senior project was, I think, writing, producing a play, and all the headaches that go with it and so on. And obviously she learned so many skills in doing that I think that's the kind of thing that, going back to that bank in Baltimore, said, we want to hire liberal arts graduates because they know how to learn and how to move on. If we have time, how's our time doing? Yeah, we have a little time. Well, there's another question we have, and it kind of overlaps with this one. Can you describe how higher education has changed from the time you began your career to the present day, and then how do you see it evolving in the future? Well, that's a big one, but we can have a shot at it. Lesley, would you answer that question, please?
Sure, I'll start. And I'll just point out that my career in academia is considerably shorter than everyone else's here. I spent the many years dancing in New York,
Yeah.
and doing stuff there. So it's a little different. But what I can say is there are a couple of things that I've noticed that are very different, that are kind of wonderful. One of which, there seems to be a greater attention to who are our students. Who are they? Who are they culturally? Who are they ability-wise, in all type, in all definitions of that word, and then what do they offer to the community, so that there's they're not just vessels, in which to be entering information. And I don't think that anybody really ever thought of them that way. But the nature of the student body, to me, has become of greater interest. Maybe a recognition that it's always been very complex in many ways. But I notice that more and more. And something that that both Michael and Maurice talked about, which is the engagement with Hartford. It's specifically at Trinity, that was just beginning when I came here. And I really think that that has been incredibly beneficial for students. And it sort of breaks them out of that silo, which you see so often in small schools, large schools that are in cities, and even, small towns, that there's the town and gown thing, but it really gets them engaged in ways that they can't be on campus. And I think that's quite special to Trinity, but very important for all colleges in this kind of position. Another thing that I've noticed is the attention to how people learn. That, to me, I've noticed that has changed in the time that I've been in academia. The recognition that there are many different ways to learn. And of course, technology allows us to embrace that, just in the ways that you both have been describing your projects, how technology allows people to use a variety of learning skills and a variety of communication skills. And I think that that's something that I've been aware of. Just quickly, in the future, I wonder, and this may be just because of COVID, but it's also due to the financial questions that you brought up. I wonder if the nature of the 4-year residential institution is going to change, if there's going to be a different way that people engage in their college education, whether more people live off campus, maybe there's, I don't know, but that's one of the things that I think is shifting, and that may be short-term because of COVID, it may be long-term, I don't know. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. By the way, thank you, those out in the audience, thank you for the messages that are coming in. I'm sorry we don't, in this format, can have give and take, but I think our emails were given to you at some point, and we'd love to hear from you, any thoughts you have as a follow-up to our conversation tonight. But let me pass it on. Michael, do you have any thoughts?
Well, just a quick thought. I graduated from Trinity in 1968, and as I've already said, I was very interested in Russia, European history, and thanks to Uncle Sam, I entered the Army and I became a Korean linguist, which is something that I had never foreseen in my future, and that would lead to a lifelong engagement with Asia. First with Korea, and then with China. And one thing I struggled with when I first came to Trinity, I even launched I launched a conference that was called "Making Asia Real," because I wondered, how do you make China, Asia, a world that Trinity students have never visited? How do you make it real to them? And as my career evolved, we received some grants and gifts. We received a wonderful gift from Mike and Trish O'Neill, who founded an endowment so that Trinity students could study in Asia, and the Riggs family, the Charlotte Riggs Endowment. And so by the end of my career, a whole bunch of students were going to Asia. Another thing that happened, and I think this has happened in a lot of cases at Trinity. It's a wonderful thing. We've encouraged team teaching, and I was able to team teach with Xiangming Chun and Joan Morrison. Xiangming Chun is a renowned specialist on cities, and Joan Morrison is an environmental scientist. And we created a course called River Cities. And we launched with a study of our own river city here in Hartford. Ultimately, we won a Henry Luce grant for this. And then we took our students to other river cities, first along the Yangtze River, and then we did rivers all over the place. We did the Mekong River. That was probably the most rococo of our trips. We went from all the way down the Mekong from Yunnan province. The Mekong, the northern Mekong, goes through China. It starts in the Himalayas all the way down to the Mekong River Delta in Vietnam, stopping at cities along the way. And you know, I mention this to illustrate two things. I think Trinity, one of the wonderful things about being a teacher at Trinity is that Trinity has always encouraged kind of entrepreneurialism. And so in your time as a teacher here, if you're a little bit on the qui-vive, you can really grow yourself along with your students and learn all sorts of new and fascinating things, and you know, and improve the academic paradigm, the model as you go along. So you know, long live Trinity College.
Thank you. Maurice, any final thoughts?
Yes, I mean, one of the obvious ways that higher education has evolved over time, and that's reflected at Trinity, is demographically. The faculty, the student body, both are more diverse than they were when I started in 1983. We have more first generation college students than we ever had. I mean, I'm the first one in my family to ever go to college, and a liberal arts education opened the world to me. The experiences I've had, the people I've met, the things I've learned were beyond imagination for me before my liberal arts education, and certainly weren't imaginable to my ancestors. And that's been reflected in the evolution of the curriculum, as Michael has mentioned. The curriculum now engages the world in a way it didn't back in 1983. I developed a course years ago in African philosophy, and my colleagues didn't say to me, "What do you know about African philosophy? You can't teach that." They encouraged me. And, you know, I read books and articles and went to conferences and developed the course. So one avenue of evolution that I think it must continue, will continue, is that kind of engagement with the diversity of our society and the world. Another thing I would mention is new information technologies are coming down the pike all the time. And I think at least us older folks might be somewhat threatened by those and wonder, how do you teach when a student could have a paper written by artificial intelligence or things like that? But the fact of the matter is these things aren't going to go away. They're going to proliferate. They're going to become more powerful. And I think one of the challenges the college and colleges in general face is, how do you incorporate those things into a liberal arts education that has integrity, right? Because you can't keep them out. I just don't think it's possible. They're part of the environment in which we live, and they're going to be there. They're going to get more powerful. So I applaud my young colleagues, and I mentioned Amanda Guzman before, who are engaging these technologies and bringing them into the classroom, into her pedagogy, into her scholarship. And along those lines, I think the college is going to have to invest more in information technology specialists, and they're going to have to be better integrated into the activities, the scholarly and pedagogical activities of the faculty. we should not see them simply as offering services to us. We need to see them as colleagues, as co-workers in this enterprise of the liberal arts, an enterprise that is going to be very deeply and comprehensively affected by these new technologies. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are drawing near the end of our hour together, and I'm going to thank Bonnie Walters for getting us all together and getting this show on the road. It's been a very rich and rewarding hour for me. One final kind of recollection: when I came to Trinity, I did my homework. I got good grades for a couple of years and so on. And one day I was sitting in the library in what was then the smoking section. And George Cooper came in and he said, "Paints," he called me Paints. He sort of said, "Why don't you get serious?" And he started rattling off books I should read and so forth. And as a result, I began to do strange things, like read books that weren't assigned. And it was really at that point that the world opened up. I mean, Maurice, you sort of mentioned this. I mean, the world opened up to me and I became what I called a twice-born academic. And it made all the difference. And to me, that's what, not everyone at Trinity may have that, but I think that at its best is what Trinity tries to do, is really open up the world to its students. And the rest follows from there, lifelong learning and all that sort of stuff. So again, I want to thank my panelists. Again, thank Bonnie. It's been and thank all of you who, about 50 or so of you that signed up and stayed for the whole hour. It's been a very, very wonderful time to be with you. And I think we'll close it out at that. And thank you all again. It's been a wonderful, wonderful hour. Good night.